places, like the voters in El Paso voting down this Proposition K. These are places, I'm not advocating voting, but I am saying pay attention to what is happening in your own area. Pay attention to that and who's behind it and who's funding it. Because, as Alan says in this talk, it is so easy through their relentless propaganda to have us hating one another, always taking the heat off themselves. So the person you hate is the wrong class or the wrong color or from the wrong country. Don't get caught in that. Just keep elevating your thinking and know who your enemies really are. I want to let you know that the next post will be on Wednesday, and that is the excerpt for the Programmed People excerpt series. And the video that's going up on Wednesday is entitled The Beatles. The Beatles. And Mike has done a really great job on this video. I enjoyed watching it so much, and I think you'll have a good time with it too. All of the themes and the concepts that we're hitting, some of these are reiterated in today's Redux. What is programming? What is propaganda? How does it work? And we're trying to stick with simple examples of programming. So I hope you are all getting a lot from this series. I will leave you now to this talk, which I hope you enjoy. Thank you.
Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt, and this is Cutting Through the Matrix on the 30th of December 2018. I hope everyone is settling down after the Christmas craziness, the mad Christmas craziness and New Year craziness, and getting over all the tension that built up towards the whole frenzy of commercialism, which has become Christmas, unfortunately. And it's true enough, I mean, folk are snapping. They get awfully snappy at this time of year. And I noticed it even at the local general store that is supposed to be a post office as well, although it really sells booze. That's its main income, is alcohol. And they don't really cater much to the grocery section they're supposed to be doing, but they accept parcels to come in there, although somehow they manage to get round to posting stuff out from there with stamps, etc. But they'll accept parcels because they get paid for it at this little general store. Even there they were kind of nasty. We went to go and try and pick up a parcel that I knew had been delivered because it had a tracking number to it. And this is the craziness as you go down the tubes into this third worldism that I talk about. You find that things just simply don't work the same way. Or if they don't work the same way and there's no real crisis, people start sticking by crazy rules. Where at one time Canadians would be give you more leeway with things. For instance, in these big giant postbox conglomerates that we go up and collect our mail from, the postman will often put in a little chitty, a little receipt thing, or that you're supposed to take out to the general store to collect your parcel, if it's a parcel size. And lo and behold, this thing wasn't there. So I go up there, and by God, were they snooty towards me, as though I was in a different country. And they haven't quite got into the touch of the Canadians don't get like that, towards customers, the general public, especially the general public who happen to pay for the post office, because it's all funded by us, the taxpayer. And the government's supposed to be there to serve the public. There's no pretense in a lot of people these days. And they get kind of snooty at you. And they don't really want to give you a parcel unless you have this little chitty. Well, if the postman hasn't given you the little chitty for your parcel, then they should simply hand it over, since they don't know it's there and they know who you are and you're going to sign for it anyway, and etc. Because that's, I mean, for years and years I went to the same place to pick up parcels. And it's changed hands, you see, too. There was never a problem if you didn't have a chitty. Because the postman often, especially in the Christmas rush, he's not got time to do all that kind of stuff. Or it may have gone into a different post box, for instance, where someone else has got it. Or maybe he was just too much in a rush. He's standing there in the freezing cold, sub-zero temperatures, ticking off different things and putting mail in the boxes. And it's gigantic. It's like a whole range, a whole stack of them, all these different boxes for different people. We collect our own. We don't get delivered to the houses because we're first world, you see. As I say, he's supposed to put a chitty there, but if he doesn't do it, so what? Generally, in years gone by, there was no crisis about it. But now, there are different peoples with different attitudes, and they treat you like a peasant. And a naughty peasant, because you're obviously lying. You must be lying. They don't say that, but infer it. You can tell. And it's your fault that they didn't get the chitty. Eh? So what are they going to do? Are they going to keep the parcel or something? Well, I got the darn parcel. But I will put in a higher complaint about it. Because you got to start complaining now. As we're down the tubes, you've got to start complaining. Or you'll get walked all over in this system that's really becoming inhumane. And you're amongst people now who are all out for themselves. They have no idea what really part of the community even means. Which is give and take. That kind of stuff. Common sense is called decency and respect for the customer. Respect's awfully important. You start losing respect, I'm not kidding you, you're going down the tubes fast. So I told this woman, I said I didn't get the chitty. Oh, she was not happy at all, not happy at all. And they're getting paid for it anyway. It comes in there, and they get paid for every parcel that comes in. They won't post anything out of there, because they managed to get around that somehow when they took over the business, which is really bad, because there's no post office for miles now. You have to go into Sudbury, into the city, from the country now, to get something posted off. Isn't that disgusting? Huh? As we claim we're a first world country, but it's all perception management, isn't it? As we go down the tubes. And when you see how much the American dollar is worth the Canadian dollar, I mean, we've sunk about 30 cents and dropping fast below what the US dollar is. And over the years, I've seen the Canadian dollar at times being more than the US dollar. And they swap up and down because it's the same conglomerate of managers managing the World Bank system that just moves it back and forth from country to country to suit themselves. This up and down exchange rate. So as we plummet, other countries are benefit, but it's all benefiting through the same banking system. It's all a con game, a shell game, isn't it? But as I say, getting back to this whole, you have to start complaining these days and going above folks' heads. Because they won't respect you as a customer. You have to go above their heads, you see. And it's only a little bit of fear from their superiors, whoever they happen to be, or the licensing committees that gets some respect on the go. Because this is not a third world country, or treated like a third world. Not exactly just yet, although it's dropping. Respect, respect, respect. And we live in such an age of propaganda. Incredible propaganda. I was going to give a talk, actually more than a talk. I could write a book on the agencies involved in propaganda in country by country. It's into the thousands now, folks, of agencies employed by using our tax money to brainwash us. Really is. You have no idea. When you look at even the movies that say Hollywood has churned out with the Pentagon over many years for the war industry. There was one that was called Executive Decision with Kurt Russell in it, and Kurt Russell's been in a lot of these kind of movies, but the money they must have forked out from the taxpayer to make the thing must have been phenomenal, using the Air Force and different agencies, etc. With the usual anti-terrorism thing. Back in the 90s, getting all ready for it. But it's the same in every country. We're getting incredible propaganda. And they give us the nudge units. Sunstein's nudge units, he called them. And these are the agencies that literally are working round the clock now, lots of them, on training you what to say, what not to say, how to behave, how to change behavior, without you even being aware that it's being applied to you. You'll simply, it's behaviorism, incredible behaviorism, run by experts, as they say. Again, using our tax money to brainwash us and change our behavior. Even to make you feel bad or guilty about stuff that you shouldn't feel bad or guilty about. Really. It's quite something else, isn't it? And they give you the leaders. Don't forget that when it comes to psychology. They'll pick them up, boost them to the top, give them lots of fair play, and they're part of the system already. And then television and so on. They always give you your leaders. Don't forget that, folks. Most folk will forget it. They always forget it. But they do. That's how it's run. It must always appear to the public that things happen by themselves, spontaneously. And they give you the leaders. And you'll find the leaders often are part of different United Nations agendas and are on committees for sustainability and things like that in the past. It's really astonishing to dig in a little bit and find out, my God, you're right enough. Yeah, you're right. That little sixth sense that you have, listen to it once in a while. Intuition. But every country has got these behavioral insights teams working globally, by the way. They're connected across the whole planet. Set up, again, behind your backs, without your knowledge. They're prompting you and training you. And they also draft up all the things the hate speech taboos. And they also help train the people who are now censoring you. And I'll mention a couple of things that are happening about that tonight, in fact. It's really difficult for people, very difficult for people, to really believe that most of the leaders that you'll end up following are always presented and given to you. They're handed to you. Really. I read an article recently, for instance, about the last midterm elections they had in the States. And how many of them now are getting promoted through and via the CIA, FBI, ex-military and so on, high military and intelligence, and getting them into the politics for the Democrats now, so that they'll become, of course, which they really are already, the middle stream of America, of the military-industrial complex. The true working people are, forget it, folks, it's no different in Britain or anywhere else. The Labour Party in Britain forgot the working people, I think, back in Harold Wilson's day. Really. And definitely, come the 70s and 80s, totally forgot the working people altogether. But they still give you representatives that occasionally give the right talks about it. But they're completely for the war agendas. They're completely for this global agenda of internationalism and experts running our lives for us all. It goes on and on. It never ends, does it? But don't forget it. It's not supposed to end. War's not meant to be fought and won. It's meant to continue forever. George Orwell's 1984. It's very profitable for those involved in the making of the weapons and the surveillance stuff too. Back in the 90s, they had articles in big magazines, well-known magazines at the time, about the end of war. What would happen if you had the end of war? When we don't have other countries to fight, even though that was it's a what-if thing. They knew darn well they're going to bring in an age of terrorism as a backlash against the wars they were going to have. And that all set up too. But they did say that if there was no war, just in a hypothetical world, how would these same organizations that fund or that make the weapons, for instance, what would they do? Well, it's explained that they're already turning and turned away into mass surveillance. And then early 90s this was. So it's not just happening. And that the police would be part of it too, and they get all these special surveillance techniques. We have fusion centers now across the North America and Europe, where they can route whole segments of society and individuals within and route all their stuff through certain fusion points as well. I know someone who got into British Telecom, and he actually found one of the main trunk systems went across to Belgium. And this is the main ones, of course, for security and so on. But they're heading off to Belgium for some reason, and the public were totally unaware of it. And they're routing a lot of folks' calls all over the place. So they were being spied on a long time ago. Spied on. Then they mentioned, it's just black boxes that rouse them and so on, and for certain people, blah, blah, blah. And then they had the big God machine. They thought, oh my God, this God machine, or the devil machine, as some of them called it. It was a mass computer system in the 90s. They could hook up everybody's ID, everything about every individual. It was already up and being added to with information again in the 90s. Folk forget all that too. The beast. A whole bunch of names for the same thing. And then in the late 90s, after lots of anti-Middle Eastern movies, basically, or about Middle Eastern people, lots of movies, getting everybody used to it, bingo, it happened to 2001. And away we've gone since then. It hasn't stopped. And it won't stop. Because it's too lucrative. And governments start to lose their traction to an extent. Governments either have to say, we're so busy fighting terrorism and wars and so on and blah, blah, blah. Or, if there's none of that, they've got to start answering some of the questions put to them by the people. So it's much easier to say, oh, we're just so busy tackling all this crisis across the globe, etc., etc., etc. And politicians, remember, are partly there to fill their own pockets, because that's the kind of people who go into politics. They used to publish the criminal records of politicians in Britain and other countries, in Canada too. And folk could apply to go into politics. And the amount of them who had been bankrupt umpteen times before that is just astonishing. It tells you a lot about them. And they go into politics because they get a little bit of power. They can start getting a lot of wealth. It's astonishing, isn't it? No matter what the income is, they seem to always bring in more than the income's worth. Isn't that astonishing? Of course, they're seeing lots of lobbyists all the time, aren't they? And even though they're not the bosses, there's a certain amount of play to help to fill their own pockets with things. Of course there is. And lots of them get awfully well rewarded as soon as they walk out of politics. Some of them go into politics right from corporations, high levels in corporations. And then when they're in politics, they help change the playing field for their own ex-corporation. Let's say ex-corporation. And once they've changed the rules a bit, they go back into the same corporations. You find the same with the US. The US is good. It's always getting picked on, but it's more open about its systems and who's in the systems of governing the people and the different agencies than elsewhere in the world. And I've had articles before over the years where you had the Food and Drug Administration, for instance. The folk are trained to believe they're there to look after the people. But so many of them, including some of the heads of them at times, are coming straight out of big pharma, or of chemical agencies, or the ones who supply the chemicals to farming, for instance. As I say, but mainly the drug corporations. And they come in, they sit in the panels, change things, even get drugs passed and so on, and then go back to the same companies that they worked for. It's astonishing. It really is astonishing how this works. It truly is. At least in the States, it's a bit more open. If you want to get the information, you have more chance of getting it. Other countries, especially the European and the British system of the British Commonwealth countries, are much better at covering it up until you can find hardly anything at all. That's how it is. And it's astonishing. Everything's astonishing, really, isn't it? Because we're trained to believe one thing, while the truth is always something else. And young folk who think they're on a roll, coming into any job, it's always been this way, are cocky. Naturally, they're cocky. They think they're always told that they're better educated than anybody that came before them. But when you really question them and their cockiness, they'll argue with you about everything. And at the same time, they really haven't got a clue what they're talking about. They believe what they're told. They don't go and look at anything for themselves. But they tend to believe what they're told. But they still argue with you, even though they don't know. I had a little disagreement there with TELUS again. It's the TELUS company in Canada, where they gave me the bill for the month, and they claimed that they didn't get the money for last month, the previous month. But it was sent off on time, plenty of time. Weeks and weeks, in fact, before it was due. And this cocky guy comes on, and right off the bat, he says, I didn't think our company accepted checks anymore. Arrogant, you know what? Huh? Cocky, arrogant, you know what. See, they're trying to get everybody off checks. And totally electronic. It saves them time and everything else. And they want to have access to your bank account so they can just put their hands in there and pull it. Most folk don't mind. They're trained so well. Because Bernays said what? What did Ed Bernays say? He says, don't make good products to serve the people. Change the people to serve your product. Where it's a supermarket, make them going like chickens like a conveyor belt to pick up all their stuff. The check counter. Or, like TELUS, for instance. Yeah. Make the people do all the work. And that'll save the company for more money, for more profit and more profit. They're doing awfully well as it is. So I mentioned to him, I says, you got it. And I asked him too, I said, you try to get us off. Is this really, because you don't know, they could hold back the check and not bother putting it through, just so that knowing you'll call up, and then try to browbeat you. And they'll probably look up your age and everything else here too. Oh yeah, so and so, yeah. Very cocky and arrogant. Again, to the customer. This is where it's coming down to now. There's no pretense now at serving the customer. You get mocked now when you call up to complain about something. And that's what mockery is. So I told him, I says, you want it all cashless, blah, blah, blah. I prefer getting the check through. I says, and that check, when it comes back from the bank, after being cashed and a whole bit, that's your receipt. You got proof. When your computer crashes, what you got? Gone. But I couldn't believe the guy. And I just, bantered a little bit with him. And it's amazing what he did not know. But he was sure that he did. He didn't even know the banks had been bailed out in 2008 and 9 in Canada. He didn't know that. He didn't believe it. But he's arrogant, so arrogant and cocky, you see, because after all, he's younger. And he just knows everything better than you. And he thinks he's on a roll in his job. So as it turned out, eventually I got them to cancel any late fee, because I'm not late for anything. I says, look, the post office has been on this strike go slow thing for a while. I says, take it up with the Canadian government, they own it. It's not my fault. I put the thing up in time. And as I say, I have no proof that I didn't receive it, in fact. And it's definitely, it could be worth their while to get everybody totally cashless and just hold it back. Of course it did. Because he kept saying right off the bat, he's trying to get you paid cashless. Immediately. As I say, he couldn't finish a sentence before do we still even take checks anymore? I don't think we even have a department that does that. I says, well, you've been happy to take it for the last 6 years. But cocky and arrogant to the customer. That's what you're getting these days, folks. And as it gets more and more centralized, this power, of course, by corporations wanting to get together like a big gang for everything you need, including your food, by the way, and everything else, it's going to get a lot worse. A lot worse. There is no democracy. There's only special rights groups for special groups that they've created to give you the appearance of democracy, but for reality, for the general population, for anything you really need at all, there's no democracy at all. Unless you stand up for it and demand it. And it's time you all started doing that individually. Absolutely. Absolutely. And folk will always say, oh yeah, if the people could only do this or do that. I can remember years ago when they talked about the price of gasoline going up. And the old cry was, if everyone would just stop buying it for a week, you bring them to their knees, which is true. But you can't ever get the public to do anything together, which the big boys know. And it's even better when they can always divide and conquer. And it's even better again when they have an amazing class system, which we pretend doesn't exist in democracies. But living in Britain, I certainly knew the caste system. And the folk at the bottom always suffer first with whatever it is that they need that gets shoved up in price. And the ones and it's a varying middle class, from just middle class to wealthy middle class to even very wealthy middle class, you see. There's a whole range amongst themselves too. But the idea is they don't feel the pain, obviously, if they can keep affording whatever it is that everyone's suffering down below them. They don't care. And they're encouraged not to care about it. then of course they start squealing when it's their turn, if it gets that high. And they put enough pressure on perhaps and stop buying or whatever until whatever there's a protesting caves in. That's how it works. Why do you think government has created all the different factions of gender wars and subgender wars and variations and ethnic wars and blah, 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 getting everybody to fight everybody else? It's wonderful when you really think that everybody's fighting everybody else. Well, you're all being plundered for your price of your gasoline, for electricity, for your food that's going up and up and up, etc., etc. Meanwhile, everybody's taught that that's not important. Let's fight this and let's fight that. Forget that. Forget all the other things, folks. I don't care who you are. If you eventually can't afford your food, you're in trouble. And the agenda is to bring in mass austerity. They all signed on to that, the United Nations, a few years ago. After the last crash, the coming austerity. And the Club of Rome talked about the necessity to bring in austerity, and Maurice Strong talked about bringing austerity in a post-industrial, post-consumerist society. What do you think they meant by that? These are for folk who talk to the public like dictators talked. Maurice Strong especially. He said one at the Earth meeting, the first one, and I've got the old recording there of people who attended it. When they asked him at the end, when they said, look, in this Earth Charter, there's no rights for humans mentioned here. And Maurice, with his usual arrogance, his cocky arrogance, he says, because the guy said, you've got rights for even trees, for biodiversity. And so Maurice Strong says, by the time we're finished, you'll wish you had the rights of a tree. Well, no one ever voted for Maurice Strong to have any position over anybody, but he was put in there by the CFR, Royal Institute for International Affairs, and he was picked up by, David Rockefeller it was actually, picked him up and groomed him and put him into the oil business in Canada and other places. And old Morris had told everybody else to be austere, had massive business interests across the globe in energy sectors. Is this telling you to use less and live in austerity? It's always the same story, folks, from these crooks. And they are gangsters, belonging to a club, who've been trained and picked, the real, ultra deep state above all, and picked to rule over the people. Not with any democracy in mind at all. Democracy is a temporary sham, folks. And it was designed to be a temporary sham. There have been many articles written about Maurice Strong. And here's one, actually, from a few years ago, and talks about Maurice Strong, Climate Crook, it's called. Editors said that 5 years ago, Quadrant Online, that's the organization that published this, I guess, published this profile of Maurice Strong as the man who, more than any other, redefined a trace gas, that was carbon dioxide, as a meal ticket for tens of thousands of climate functionaries. The same people whose light-fingered heirs, awfully well put to, are today gathered in Paris. That was back in 2015. To mark his passing, we once again present, says John Izzard's profile of the man who did very nicely by costing everyone else dearly. This is a massive plan to control the lives of us all and enrich those at the top. It's so interesting to look at the CFR, Royal Institute for International Affairs group, that runs the planet. At least they're the second tier at the top. There's a capstone above them because there's another party. But they run your politics. They actually set up the organizations and think tanks that advise governments across the whole planet. They run think tanks for the military across the whole planet. Everything that means anything at all is run by them and their members, including how to control the people and run the people and organize the people and even depopulate the planet through austerity, etc. And you don't vote for any of them. And it says, the yellow brick road to climate change. January has certainly been a defining month in the quest for truth about climate change, and the custodians of that truth aren't looking that flash at the moment. Indeed, in the month of January, some of the major doomsday prophecies unravelled, and the prophets themselves seemed to undergo vows of silence. This is Kevin Rudd, Penny Wong, Tim Flannery, who are never lost for words, seemed, well, totally lost for words. Like Dorothy Lion, Tin Man and Scarecrow in The Wizard of Oz, we've all been dancing down the real brick road of settled science, as they call it, the pretense of it, you see, in search of answers from the emerald